The day my manager announced that my salary would be cut by 15%, everyone at the conference table avoided my eyes, as if silence could disguise betrayal. 6 months later, the same company was calling almost every day, offering me 80% more to come back. But by then, they had no idea how much their single decision had already cost them. They're reducing your salary by 15%, effective next Monday. My manager delivered the sentence with the same expression people use when announcing the weather. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He simply slid a printed document across the conference table and folded his hands. For a moment, I thought I was looking at someone else's name. Then I saw mine. 15%? I asked, keeping my voice steady. There has to be a mistake. There isn't. He leaned back in his chair. The company is making financial adjustments. I looked at the report again. 9 years. 9 years of solving impossible deadlines, rescuing struggling accounts, mentoring new hires, and answering client calls long after everyone else had gone home. After all that, I had become a line item to cut. So this is about the budget? It's about what's best for the business. I couldn't help smiling. A strange definition of best. His expression tightened. This decision came from leadership. There it was, the sentence managers use when they don't want ownership, only obedience. I stood up, thanked him for the meeting, and walked out before my frustration could speak louder than my professionalism. The office fell strangely quiet the moment I returned. People weren't working. They were pretending to work. Monitors glowed, keyboards clicked, but every pair of eyes followed me for a fraction of a second before looking away. News traveled faster than email. Lisa slowly rolled her chair toward my desk. They told you? I nodded. She lowered her voice. I heard they only picked a few people. Apparently, I made the list. Her face hardened. That's insane. I shrugged. Apparently, experience has become too expensive. Neither of us laughed, because neither of us believed that was the real reason. Before I could even open my inbox, another message appeared from my manager. Urgent client meeting, 11:30 a.m. I stared at the screen for a second. They had just reduced my salary. Now they needed me to save one of our biggest accounts? The irony wasn't even trying to hide anymore. The meeting lasted almost an hour. The client was frustrated about delayed deliveries, inconsistent communication, and mistakes that had piled up since 2 experienced employees had resigned months earlier. My manager barely spoke. Whenever a difficult question appeared, everyone's attention shifted toward me. I explained the recovery plan. I answered every concern. By the end of the meeting, the client agreed to continue the partnership. As soon as the call ended, my manager smiled. Excellent work. I looked directly at him. So my expertise is still worth full price when a client is about to leave. His smile disappeared. We appreciate everything you do. I noticed. The conversation ended there, not because I was satisfied, because I realized something far more important. They knew exactly how valuable my work was. They simply believed I had nowhere else to go. Back at my desk, I opened my task tracker. 5 active clients, 3 major projects. The workload left behind by an employee who had resigned. Another vacant position the company still hadn't filled. Our team wasn't just busy. We were understaffed, and everyone knew it. Instead of hiring replacements, leadership kept asking the remaining employees to stretch a little further, stay a little later, take one more project. handle one more emergency. The workload kept growing. The paycheck didn't. Around 4 o'clock, HR sent an email thanking everyone for their continued commitment during this transition. The timing almost made me laugh. Commitment wasn't the problem. Recognition was. On my way to the parking garage, I passed the executive floor. Through the glass walls, I could see catered lunches, polished conference tables, and a room full of people discussing efficiency. Downstairs, my team was skipping lunch breaks just to keep clients from leaving. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Rain had started falling by the time I reached my car. The windshield blurred the city into streaks of silver and red, while the office building slowly disappeared in the rearview mirror. I should have been thinking about bills, about the missing 15%. Instead, one question kept repeating itself. If the company believed I was worth less today than I was yesterday, why was every important client still asking for me? That night, I opened my laptop. Not to resign, not to send applications, just to see what someone with 9 years of experience was actually worth outside those office walls. I hovered over the browser for several seconds before typing a single search. Sometimes the smallest decision doesn't feel important when you make it. Only later do you realize it was the moment everything quietly began to change. If I had known where that first search would eventually lead, I would have looked much sooner. The next morning, I walked into the office expecting another exhausting day. Instead, my phone buzzed before I even reached my desk. "Hi, this is Rachel from Northbridge Solutions. We came across your profile and would love to discuss an opportunity if you have a few minutes." I stared at the message. I hadn't applied anywhere. I hadn't announced I was looking for a new job. The only thing I'd done the night before was update my resume and switch my LinkedIn profile to open to work, visible only to recruiters. Apparently, that was enough. I slipped my phone back into my pocket just as my manager appeared. "Morning, I need you in conference room B." Of course he did. Inside the room, half the leadership team was already waiting. One of our biggest clients had discovered another mistake, this time caused by a brand new employee who'd received barely a week of training before being thrown into a project. The client wanted answers. More specifically, they wanted me. "Can you smooth this over?" my manager asked. I looked around the room. "So the person whose salary was cut is still the one trusted to fix your biggest problems?" Nobody answered. Silence can be surprisingly honest. The meeting lasted nearly 90 minutes. By the end, the client agreed to stay, but only after I personally promised to oversee the project until completion. As everyone packed up, one executive stopped beside me. "We appreciate what you do." I smiled politely. Appreciation doesn't show up on a paycheck. His expression froze for a second before he walked away. Back at my desk, my phone buzzed again. Another recruiter. Then another. By lunchtime, I had 4 interview requests. Different industries, different companies. Every one of them offered a salary range higher than what I was earning before the pay cut. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't expected. Options. Lisa noticed me smiling. "Good news?" "Maybe." She leaned closer. "Please tell me you're leaving." I laughed quietly. "I haven't decided anything." "You should." She glanced around to make sure nobody was listening. "This place is falling apart." I looked across the office. She wasn't exaggerating. One senior analyst had already resigned. Another employee had accepted a transfer just to escape the department. The remaining team members looked exhausted. People weren't talking about long-term projects anymore. They were talking about survival. That afternoon, another email landed in everyone's inbox. Mandatory overtime this weekend. No additional pay. No explanation. Just another reminder that leadership expected loyalty while offering less in return. The reactions around the office were impossible to ignore. One coworker quietly closed his laptop and stared out the window. Another muttered, "They can't be serious." Nobody argued openly. People simply looked defeated. I accepted the first interview invitation. It was scheduled for Thursday evening, after work. No risk, no commitment, just a conversation. Thursday arrived faster than I expected. The interview lasted 45 minutes. Instead of questioning my experience, they wanted to know how I had managed complex clients, rebuilt struggling accounts, and trained entire teams. Everything my current employer treated as ordinary suddenly sounded extraordinary. The hiring manager smiled. "You've been carrying a lot of responsibility." "I guess I have." "And they reduced your salary?" I nodded. He shook his head slowly. "That's difficult to understand." It wasn't the sympathy that surprised me. It was the confusion. To an outsider, the company's decision made absolutely no sense. When the interview ended, I closed my laptop and sat in silence. For the first time since the pay cut, I wasn't wondering whether I deserved better. I knew I did. The offer arrived the very next afternoon. 28% higher than my original salary, not 15% lower, 28% higher. Better health insurance, a signing bonus, hybrid work, professional development, and one sentence that stayed with me longer than the numbers. "We believe experienced employees are investments, not expenses." I read it 3 times. No corporate buzzwords, no speeches about sacrifice, just respect. That evening, I printed my resignation letter. It fit on a single page, 9 years of loyalty, reduced to 1 signature. As I placed the letter into my bag, I felt strangely calm. I wasn't leaving because of the money. I was leaving because the company had shown me exactly how much they valued me. And once someone shows you who they are, believing them becomes the easiest decision you'll ever make. They thought replacing me would be simple. They were about to find out how expensive that assumption really was. If you've ever been told to do more with less, I'd love to hear your story. And if you want to see what happened after I handed in that resignation letter, make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming next. My first week at the new company felt almost unreal. The office was brighter. The equipment was newer. My paycheck was exactly what they had promised, and then some. Everyone smiled, introduced themselves, and welcomed me like I'd been part of the team for years. For a moment, I wondered if I'd made the best decision of my career. Then my phone rang. The caller ID displayed my former company's main number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another call came in. This time, it was my former manager. I didn't answer. When I finally listened to the voicemail that evening, his voice sounded nothing like the calm, confident manager I had worked with for years. "Emily, if you have a few minutes, please call me back. We have a situation." I didn't. I had already fulfilled every obligation before leaving. I had documented my projects, trained my replacement, and completed a professional handover. Whatever situation they had now wasn't mine to solve. The next morning, another voicemail arrived. Then another. By Friday, even HR had started calling. Something was happening. I found out what it was from Lisa. She texted me late that evening. "You picked the right time to leave." I called her immediately. "What happened?" She sighed. "Everything." She explained that my replacement had resigned after only 8 days. 2 senior analysts had accepted offers from competitors. 1 project manager had transferred to another division. The department that had already been understaffed was suddenly missing 4 experienced people. "Who's handling the accounts?" I asked. Lisa laughed. "That's the problem. Nobody." The silence that followed said more than any explanation could. Monday morning brought another surprise. One of my former clients emailed my personal address, not to offer me work, not to complain, simply to ask if I was all right. "I've noticed several familiar people are gone," he wrote. "Things don't seem very stable over there." I replied politely, explaining that I was no longer with the company and couldn't discuss internal matters. Still, his message stayed with me. Clients notice instability much faster than executives do. Over the next few weeks, the calls from my former employer became less frequent, but more urgent. First it was my manager, then HR, then the department director. Finally, one afternoon, my phone displayed a name I had never expected to see: the Vice President of Operations. I answered out of curiosity. "Emily, thank you for taking my call. I have about 5 minutes. I'll be brief." His voice carried none of the confidence I'd heard during company meetings. "We've experienced unexpected challenges since your departure." Unexpected. That word almost made me smile. Experienced employees had warned leadership for months that the department was stretched too thin. They ignored it. Now they were calling the person they had decided was worth 15% less. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "We've lost 2 major accounts," he paused, "and several projects are behind schedule." I listened without interrupting. "We were hoping you might be willing to consult with us for a few days." There it was, the first real admission that replacing me hadn't gone according to plan. "I appreciate you asking," I replied, "but I've committed myself to my new employer." "I understand." His voice sounded genuinely disappointed. Before ending the call, he added one final sentence. "I don't think we realized how much of the department depended on you." After we hung up, I stared out the office window. Rain tapped softly against the glass, while people around me continued their meetings, completely unaware of the conversation I'd just had. For the first time, I realized this wasn't about one employee leaving. It was about years of leadership believing that loyalty could be taken for granted. Meanwhile, life at my new company wasn't unfolding quite the way I'd imagined. The salary was better, the title looked impressive, but something felt off. My new manager measured success by spreadsheets alone. Ideas were dismissed before they were finished. People competed instead of collaborating. No one stayed after meetings to help a struggling teammate. Everyone simply protected their own position. I had escaped being undervalued, but I wasn't sure I had found where I truly belonged. A month later, Lisa sent me one final message before going offline for the evening. "You won't believe this. The board has started asking questions about what's happening in our department." I read the message twice. If the board was involved now, this was no longer just a staffing problem. It had become a leadership problem, and I had a feeling the next phone call would be very different. Nearly 4 months passed before my former company contacted me again. By then, the calls had stopped, the emails had stopped, life had settled into a routine. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. From the outside, my new job looked like a success. The salary was excellent, the benefits were generous, and my resume suddenly carried the name of a respected company. But every morning, I found myself sitting in the parking lot for a few extra minutes before going inside. Not because the work was difficult, because the atmosphere was. People guarded information instead of sharing it. Meetings felt more like competitions than conversations. If someone made a mistake, nobody helped fix it. They looked for someone to blame. Even my manager believed pressure was the best form of motivation. Results first, people second, he liked to say. At first, I ignored it. Then I realized everyone else had learned to do the same. The office was efficient. It just wasn't a place anyone actually wanted to be. One Thursday afternoon, I was finishing a presentation when my phone lit up again. It wasn't my old manager. It wasn't HR. It was the CEO of my former company. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen. Then I answered. "Emily, thank you for taking my call." His voice sounded different from the confident executive who used to address hundreds of employees during company meetings. It sounded tired. "I know I don't have much right to ask for your time," he continued, "but I'd appreciate 20 minutes. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met the following evening at a quiet cafe halfway between our offices. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked older, more exhausted. After a few minutes of polite conversation, he finally got to the point. "I owe you an apology." I didn't respond. When leadership approved the salary reductions, we believed we were solving a financial problem. He let out a quiet breath. We were actually creating a much bigger one. He explained what had happened after I left. The department never recovered. My replacement lasted less than 2 weeks. 3 more experienced employees resigned within 2 months. 2 major clients terminated their contracts after repeated project failures. Several others reduced their business significantly. Then came the internal audit. It concluded that leadership had ignored repeated warnings about staffing levels, overworked employees, and talent retention. The report eventually reached the board. Several senior executives, including my former direct manager, were no longer with the company. The entire leadership structure had been reorganized. I listened without interrupting, not because I enjoyed hearing it, because none of it surprised me. "You weren't the problem," the CEO said quietly. "Our decisions were." For the first time since this conversation began, I looked directly at him. "What happens now?" He slid a folder across the table. "We'd like you to come back." I didn't open it. "I already have a job." "I know." "And you know why I left." "I do." There was no defensiveness in his voice, no excuses, only accountability. "The company today isn't the company you walked away from." I remained silent. "We've rebuilt the leadership team. We've changed our retention policies. We've created mentoring programs. And every major decision involving experienced employees now goes through executive review." He paused. "We learned those lessons the expensive way." I finally opened the folder. Inside was a formal offer. My eyes stopped on one number. Base salary. 80% higher than my previous salary. For a second, I genuinely thought I had misread it. The increase wasn't symbolic. It wasn't a small raise meant to save face. It was life-changing. Along with it came a signing bonus, additional vacation, flexible scheduling, leadership responsibilities, and one line that mattered more than anything else. Direct reporting line changed. I would never again work under the manager who had cut my salary. "I don't expect an answer tonight," the CEO said. I wouldn't either. He stood to leave, then stopped. "I know money isn't why you left. You're right. So if you decide to return, I want it to be because you believe we've changed." After he left, I remained in the cafe long after my coffee had gone cold. For months, I had convinced myself that going back was impossible. Now, I wasn't so sure, especially because every day at my new company reminded me that a higher paycheck alone couldn't create the kind of workplace where people actually wanted to build a career. For the first time since I walked out of my old office, the future no longer seemed obvious. And whatever decision I made next would shape far more than just my career. I barely slept that night. The offer sat on my kitchen table beside a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Every time I walked past it, I told myself I already knew the answer. Then I'd stop, because I didn't. If someone had asked me 6 months earlier whether I would ever consider returning to the company that cut my salary, I would have laughed. Now, it wasn't such an easy question. The money was certainly impressive. An 80% increase, a signing bonus, a leadership position. But none of those things had convinced me. What kept replaying in my mind was something the CEO had said before leaving the cafe. "We're not asking you to return to the company you left. We're asking you to see the company we've become." The next morning, I agreed to visit the office. Nothing more, just a visit. Walking through the front entrance felt strangely familiar. The same marble floor, the same reception desk, the same company logo hanging on the wall. Yet somehow, everything felt different. People weren't rushing past each other with their heads down anymore. The tension that used to fill the building had disappeared. Then I heard someone call my name. "Emily!" I turned around. Lisa hurried across the lobby before wrapping me in a hug. "I was hoping you'd come. It's good to see you. You have no idea how much everyone's been talking about today." She smiled for the first time in months. "You should see the department." As we walked upstairs, I immediately noticed the changes. The empty desks were gone. The team had grown. New employees sat beside experienced mentors instead of being left to figure everything out alone. People were actually talking to one another, helping one another. The office no longer felt like a place where everyone was simply trying to survive. The CEO met us outside the department. "Thank you for coming." He didn't waste time trying to impress me. Instead, he showed me exactly what had changed. The management structure had been rebuilt. Regular workload reviews had been introduced. Every critical account now had backup support instead of relying on one person. Employee retention had become part of every executive's performance review. Then we stopped outside a corner office. He opened the door. "This would be yours." I looked inside. It wasn't the office that caught my attention. It was the nameplate, already waiting on the desk. Director of Client Success. I turned toward him. "I thought this position didn't exist." "It didn't." "It does now," he smiled. We realized we needed someone leading people who actually understood what they were going through. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that mattered most. "My former manager?" He left after the board completed its review. "And the culture?" We're still rebuilding it. His answer surprised me. He wasn't pretending everything had become perfect. He was simply being honest. I can't promise you'll never face another difficult day here, he continued. But I can promise this. He looked me directly in the eyes. You'll never have to wonder whether your work matters. That sentence meant more than the salary, more than the title, more than the office. For months, I believed I had left because of money. Standing there, I finally understood the truth. I had left because I wanted to feel respected. The salary cut had only revealed the problem. Respect had always been the real issue. I looked around the department one last time. Lisa was laughing with 2 new team members. Clients were calling. People were solving problems together instead of blaming each other. For the first time in a long time, it felt like home. I reached for the contract, signed my name, and slid it back across the table. The CEO smiled. Welcome back. 6 months later, I was leading the very department I had once quietly walked away from. Several former clients returned after hearing about the leadership changes. The team grew stronger than it had ever been. Ironically, the company didn't succeed because I came back. It succeeded because it finally learned to value the people who made its success possible. 6 months earlier, they told me I was worth 15% less. The funny thing is, I never changed. They did.